Okay, welcome to Sprint 116 review. Let's get started. So I'll do the sprint statistics, Carol will do the community update, Harpreet will do UI, Adam on providers, Drew on automate, Joe on platform, Alberto API, Suyog documentation, and I'm sorry I didn't add Mike Shriver's name is missing there, but I'll add it in later. Sorry about that, Mike. He's going to do the QE update. Okay, so there was 285 PRs merged, and as you can see, there was a big jump here in number of PRs merged, which coincides with our upcoming build. So there's the feature freeze evidence of stuff being done. And here you see the same, a lot of work was done with PRs. There's 285 and 262 were open this sprint. And we also took the number of open PRs down that were remaining open, took them down. And here's the PRs by label. So here again, it shows that the bugs, enhancement, and test all had significant contributions. And for the health report, everything was pretty stable. We got coverage bump on Amazon and Ansible Tower. So that much is good. And over to Carol.
Hey, thank you, John. So for the community update, we have the latest release of Hammer 9, just released earlier this week, I think yesterday, and the blog post is part of the online press, so it's available. Take a look, check it out. And next, the I release, which is named after Vasily Ivanchuk. The branch has been created, so please check out Jason's forum post on our talk forum on the labeling and the backporting process and information. And finally, next weekend we have DevConf India in Bengaluru, and we're going to have ManageIQ booth, a demo, good stuff. And I want to thank Satyajit from the QE team based in Pune for the help in the coordination, especially from the India side, because it's really difficult for me to do that from remotely. So he's been doing a lot of work to put everything together, staffing, demos, everything. So look forward to that. And I think that's all for this week. Thank you. And next slide, please.
Thanks, Carol. Hi, everyone. Total of 73 PRs merged across all of the UI repos during this sprint. Out of that, there were 21 enhancements, 30 bugs were fixed, and so on. There were quite a lot of enhancements made during this sprint right before the feature freeze for upcoming release. I have a link at the bottom of the slide that shows the list of all the enhancements made in Classic UI repo during this sprint. I'm going to go over some of the main ones here. Martin P. is going to go over last three items on this list. So there were two PRs merged, one in Classic UI repo and one in Service UI repo related to remote consoles buttons. In Classic UI, changes were made to unify HTML5 canvas-based remote consoles like VNC, WebMKS, and Spice under a single RBAC feature, and a non-web-based VMRC console button was extracted as a separate console type. When clicking on a VM console button, backend selects a best fit console type. And on the Service UI side, support for WebMKS remote consoles was added. Make create dialog from template reusable. An existing React form for orchestration template creation was changed to be a generic form that can be used on several other screens in coming sprints. We did not have a release info in the product anywhere, so that was added next to the product title on the About modal. I have screenshots for the next few items, so next slide, please. A new submenu optimization was added under Overview main tab. The first screen on the left shows list of out-of-the-box optimization reports, and a new submenu, that has a queue report button in each row. Once you drill down into each of these items, you will see the list of saved reports that can be further drilled into to view a saved report. Data that's displayed at the bottom of the screenshot that has some new cool features that Martin will go over on his slide. Next slide, please. Copy feature was added to catalog items and bundles. As you see here, list and detail screens of eligible items has a copy button now that brings user to a form where user can specify a name for the new item. It does async validation of the name as user types into the field, and this will copy all of the attributes from the original item. Next slide, please. Scopes were added to support filtering of archived, orphaned, and retired VMs based on RBAC. As you can see here, product features tree now has few new features for list archived, list orphaned, list retired under VM access rules. So based upon user's role, you can now hide these type of VMs from the VM Explorer. Next slide, please. A new tab, Red Hat Cloud Services, was added that has two subtabs under that, Services and Providers. As you can see in the screenshot on the left, that has a link to redirect user to Cloud Services. And the screenshot on the right has contents of Providers subtab that has two sections. Global synchronization with a synchronize this platform to cloud button that will synchronize all of MIQ data up to the cloud, and a provider synchronization section that has a list of providers with sorting and filtering. There's a synchronize button on each row and on the top of the table to be able to synchronize one or more selected providers up to the cloud. Next slide, please. Support for Azure's Stack cloud providers was added. As seen here, there's a new add provider screen for Azure Stack providers, and dashboard and textual summary screen views were added as well for that provider. Next slide, please. On to Martin. Martin, are you there?
Can you talk to them, Harpreet?
Sure, I can.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm trying to go through my notes to see. Okay, so during last sprint, Zenata was migrated over to Transifex. So we are no longer using Zenata now. And there's only one resource for all the translations in ManageIQ now. I believe in the Zenata there were multiple resources for each of the repo. And next slide, please. Okay, so in the automate, previously, I believe the only, we could only do the open URL for VM type buttons only. And I think there was support added for more of the object types. I wish Martin was here to go over this and explain it more.
That's okay. If anybody has
That's
any
all
questions,
I have for now on that slide.
Yeah, it's okay, Harpreet. If anyone has any questions, just hit up Martin, and I'm sure you can explain.
Yes. Can you hear me now?
Oh, okay. Yes, Martin.
Too well.
Yeah, we hear all of you.
Yeah. Sorry for that. So the migration to Zenata from Zenata was pushed by the fact that Zenata is going end of life, and so Milan migrated that, and on top of that, he joined all the various repositories that previously were being translated one by one, which led to a number of communication issues with the translators team, where we had to explain that yes, this is part of ManageIQ, so this is now resolved. Next slide, please. So here we basically, in the past we had the feature to open URLs through Automate only for VMs, because it was meant for or an alternative way of opening remote consoles. Currently, the same can be done for a number of different entities, including user, which is on the slide, or groups, or providers, and a number of other entities, tenants. Next slide, please. So we added this filtering view for the reports. It's not replacing the existing table view, because there are some features in the table view, such as grouping, that well, make no sense in the context of functions such as filtering or sorting. So we well decided to go step by step and just created a new view where you can filter the data currently just by one column, but the API will be added to allow filtering by multiple columns, and thus also sorting, and there will be more improvements coming to this in the following release. And next slide, please. Yeah, on to providers, Adam.
All right, thanks, Martin. So on the Amazon side, Julian made a change to allow key pair deletion for key pairs which MIQ didn't create. In the past, we would only delete key pairs that we created, so if we actually had the private key in our database, we would delete them. Julian made a change to allow deletion of key pairs that are on Amazon, which we didn't create, which maintains parity with OpenStack, which can do the same thing. Alex Z added a number of new instance types that Amazon had added recently, so now we have support for all of those and a bunch more. You can go to the PR if you want to see all the ones which were added. I ran out of space. Also, Azure Stack, we added a new provider, so Harpreet stole the fireworks on that one. So it's the on-premise version of Azure, and currently it supports inventory refresh, events, and VM provisioning, and I believe metrics is in progress on that. Next slide. So Redfish expanded the inventory collection as part of their goal to do server firmware updating. So they're currently collecting physical server NICs, storage adapters, and the server firmware as part of inventory refresh. They also did some refactoring to move a bunch of their inventory collections to core. We actually got some nice refactoring and reduced a bunch of code duplication with the Lenovo provider by just moving everything into the core physical infrastructure provider inventory collections. And on SCVMM, we fixed an issue where power operations were being shown for VMs which are powered off, so it looked like you'd be able to reset or reboot a VM which is powered off. We just had to fix the support features mixing on that one. And next slide. And so they had, Rev had an interesting issue where they were using the LUN ID to denote an iSCSI storage, but it was possible to have multiple LUNs, and they were kind of depending on the order of LUNs coming back in the same order from the API on that side. So the real fix was to use the volume group ID. Oh, I should also mention, obviously the simple issue would just, or the simple fix would just be to sort it, but you can also delete LUNs and it's still the same volume group. So they had a problem where if you deleted a LUN, it would always duplicate the storage. Yeah, so what they did was switch to using the volume group ID instead, which is always going to be the same no matter what LUNs are there. And so that was the proper fix they wanted to do. They also removed the standard, I guess not really standard anymore. They removed the classic refresh setting as an option. Before, you could switch between graph refresh and save inventory type refresh. And in an effort to move away from a bunch of old code, they are only supporting graph refresh going forward. They also removed the ability to use the v3 API. That should be supplanted by v4. So v4 has been available for a very long time. v3 has been also there. They're going to be deleting v3 in an upcoming version, and so now they also removed the ability to use the older v3 API. There's a lot of duplicate code paths where, depending on which version of the API, it was basically a completely separate set of code. So there are all kinds of problems where if you fixed a bug on one side, we forget to fix it on the other one. So now we're all graph refresh, all v4. So good stuff from the Overt team. And that's it for providers. Next slide.
Okay, so Nixie had an abundance of awesome Ansible additions and a single bug that was related to embedded Ansible and services and automate methods and pipes and things. So we added a new option for Ansible Runner to determine whether to attempt escalate privileges during the playbook run. And Ansible Runner now has working verbosity and passes the option down from services and automate. We also pass credentials from Ansible playbook automate methods and services to Runner. And we pass hosts to Runner from automate and service as well. And this service Ansible playbook post-process method got restored. Can I have the next slide, please?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. So Jeff C. added some tags that were missing in an enhancement on quota. So we now have max VMs, warn CPUs, warn memory, warn storage, and warn VMs. Lucy added a couple enhancements this time, one to pass variables between catalog items in a bundle. And I think we already had a discussion about the opening of URLs from Automate, so that's cool. We added a scope to list Automate domains from ancestor tenants that was courtesy of Libor, and Miha added a orchestration template provisioning through the new Azure Stack. Zeta also added some functionality for the copy option to catalog items, which had a couple associated bugs, one of which Greg did. It's a fixed-only copy direct custom buttons, as well as one to include resource actions, pictures, and additional tenant information. May I please have the next slide?
Yes.
Thank you.
You may.
Roman fixed a bug to allow us to deserialize symbols in the YAML dialog imports on safe load, and Lucy had a bug in which we weren't using admin to auto-approve requests. Eric did one that includes default values from service dialogues when the refresh action is invoked, and David implemented lazy loading for nested services, and that is the end of the update from the land of smoke and mirrors, by which I mean clouds and servers.
Can I do the next slide?
Yes, please.
Okay, here it comes.
Thanks.
So I think Drew and I have a little overlap, which makes some sense because of some of the work for Automate stems from the platform space, and I'll have to connect with her next week to make sure this doesn't happen again. Or we could just put the platform slides above the Automate slides, and that way she'll have duplicates of mine. Anyway, 42 PRs were merged in the platform space this sprint. For technical debt, Brandon did some random refactoring and cleanup of the service class, and Yuri made a change that will prevent MIQ requests from requeuing by only logging unique server IDs. For bug fixes, Keenan fixed a couple involving invalid sort order on table displays. He also updated the virtual attribute gem version, which pulled in fixes around turbo buttons and some performance issues. And Keenan fixed a bug where report requests would fail on an invalid SQL query when sorting. He accomplished this by allowing order fields to be subqueries. Brandon pulled in a couple of bug fixes that had been described in earlier sprints by updating the dependency on the ManageIQ appliance console. And Brandon also fixed some classification seeding because the parent ID has been removed. And I fixed a bug that had required a user to have all product features enabled in order to create a picture. Next slide, please. For general enhancements, Keenan improved performance when fetching all the currencies by performing only a single query. Brandon and Nick C. continue the ongoing improvements to our test infrastructure. There's a couple of PRs there. And here's, I think, some of the overlap that we had with the Automate, because Libor contributed a couple of enhancements, one to add scope to list Automate domains from ancestor tenants, and another to enable hiding columns dynamically. And Libor also added a new tool for exporting and importing schedules. Next slide, please. Okay, so here's the embedded Ansible enhancements. So Nick L and Nick C made a fair number of PRs on the embedded Ansible front. Here's the highlights of some of the changes that Nick C had made. Again, I think we have some overlap on the automate, but I'll read through these anyway. Remove some embedded Ansible options that are no longer used with Ansible Runner. Added a new option for Ansible Runner for whether to attempt to escalate privileges during the playbook run. Updated Ansible Runner to get verbosity working and passed the option down to allow execution TTL to work. and made multiple improvements on the credential handling. Added passing the host list down to runner when using an Ansible playbook method, and he made a change to allow specifying hosts to Ansible runner, which will avoid having to run against a hard-coded localhost. Next slide, please. And here's the highlights from the relevant changes that Nikhil has made. He fixed a manager ref for credentials by ensuring the manager resource is properly assigned when creating Automate manager credential records. Added network credentials for Ansible runner libraries. Created the Ansible runner vault credentials class. Added cloud provider credentials, and made a change to allow SSH key unlock to happen in the SSH agent when invoked by an Ansible runner. Last slide, please. So Johar and Julian continued making progress on the Ruby and Rails version upgrade front. I'm not going to go through all of these PRs. They're listed. Most of them are listed there. And lastly, Brandon addressed some Travis failures in our continuous integration environment. And that's it for the platform slash automate slides. Sorry. Onto the API.
Thanks, Joe. So with yesterday's got to event check, Jason updated the API version. It's now formally 4.1.0 for that release. For the UI, Satori did the update to the API endpoint to return the release, the name of the release of the appliance under server info. So that's for the help about in the UI. Next slide, please. Okay, so Richard did an enhancement so that for service dialogues, for the template service dialog, we now allow additional types. So it used to be just for the one type, but now that allows different dialog classes and such. So things like Ansible, our job template, and all that goodness can be done there too. Next slide. And we had an enhancement to support updating firmware. So this is essentially for the UI, so they can present the user with a list of firmware binaries from a drop-down, and they could do the application of that. So one enhancement is to return the sub-collection, the list of firmware binaries for the physical servers, and then an API request type, so that can be updated through the options for physical server firmware updates. And next slide. That's it for the API.
Good morning, everybody, and QE is here today. We have focused heavily in the last sprint on updating the framework and our tests for the Ivanchuk release and its feature content. Of note, Satya has automated our Ansible tests to cover branched repos, playbooks, and Ansible Vault credentials. Justin Watts has unblocked a lot of our container tests by moving flash messages assertions to a specific test and out of the main CRUD method for container providers. We've gone through some repository cleanup and taking advantage of some enhancements that we have for managing our BZ fields and have moved manual test cases. Nikhil Dehandre authored a log validator update that supports a wait keyword argument, so we can wait for messages to appear in the logs, and has provided some better naming for our log monitoring to update the functions that are called to start monitoring the logs and to validate the logs. Yaroslav Henner has some upcoming updates that will actually add a context manager to that log validator, pushing its behavior to be even better. And I've started work dropping support for Python 2.7, getting ahead of its eventual deprecation in January 2020. That's it from QE.
Hi, everyone. For documentation, we had 9 PRs merged in this sprint, of which 4 were bugs and 5 were enhancements. We've removed content on the deprecated topics, such as utilization planning bottleneck from the Managing Infra Inventory Guide and the Deployment Planning Guide. RSS feed and timelines from the monitoring alerts and reporting guide, classic insights from general config, and GCE provider info from the managing providers guide. We've also merged the Ruby method move into folder with an example in the methods available for automation guide, and we've also documented the RFE about where you can open VMs of a remote region from global region and related information such as the region info on the login screen and the new role information in the centralized admin section. And that's it from documentation.
Okay, that ends Sprint 116 review, and the next Sprint review will be August 7th. See you then.